Our thought for the evening is, hey, it's hard to breathe down here. Also, especially for you people out there on tapes at other times and other places, the rest of the people should know better. But let me point out, ignore just entirely when I ever use the word I. I could rearrange sentences rather than say something about, I hope to show you, I'm going to tell you so and so. I could rearrange the sentence rhetorically and make it such things as, perhaps you people can better see tonight, and all such as that. But anytime I say I, just ignore it, because it got nothing to do with me. See, because this thing is not only has no name, it's certainly not named after me. And so if I say I, and if anytime you ever take it personally or wonder, forget it. It's just the easy way of talking, okay? All right. Well, all right. Believe it or not, I'm going to see, believe it or not, let us see, if you can see, that what's going to be talked about tonight is connected with things that have been talked about under these conditions, at these tapings, perhaps last week, last month, even later. Why don't we see if you can see the connection? Of course, there is one way I start using that royal we. Doesn't everyone like that when the king and people say we? There's another cheap way of looking at it. If you were psychologically inclined to talk, or inclined to talk psychologically, you could say, well, people like that are so uncertain of themselves that they try to make more of themselves as they are. You know, in other words, I'm not just me, I'm we. On to real stuff. Perhaps you will see some connection. The strange thing that was talked about last time we taped, or it struck many of you as strange, had to do with doing something thought-wise in a different way, that you were locked in to thinking and inside the loop apparently feeling, or at least talking to yourself about feeling, about a group of people or even an individual that instilled fear, produced hatred, and I was showing you what new information was, and many, many people here and on tape went, and some people just went, let me try a different approach. Let's see if you can try a different approach. That the operational opposite of something is not merely what can be said to be its opposite, because that's always too close. It's got to be new to create any change. And to be new, it cannot be very close to the opposite. 1, 2, 3. That's a pause, see. Now I want to tell you, it cannot be too close to the opposite. It's for this reason that people cannot seem to make any profit out of ideas such as love your enemies. There is a reality behind it, and I was trying to hint to you that closer to the reality of it is what I was talking about last time we were taping. But people cannot do it. It's quite simple. But one of the reasons they cannot do it, if you ask somebody, do you hate so-and-so, an individual or some group, and they say, yes, I do. And let's assume that they were apparently in such a position, if you said, do you find favor with this condition? And they said, no, I would prefer not to hate. And you said, well, what do you think would be the right approach to work on this? Given a few minutes, and if they were just walking around citywide intelligent, they would finally say something to the effect, they would finally detail to you that the approach should be, as far as they can tell, and they seem to have some historical support, is rather than hate, go in the opposite direction. Try and love them. Now surely now all of you, whether you use those terms inside your own intellectual loop, talking to your feelings at the time, have tried to do that. If not within the guise of some organized religion, that you tried yourself. May we conclude that these erstwhile attempts have met with, shall we say, limited success. And there is a reason. Because the operational opposite of something is not what you would ordinarily say it is. There is in existence dictionaries of antonyms. And almost any word, surely, that has any great currency has an antonym. And if not, you would come up with something that you would find sufficient. That if you described any feeling, and I said, what would be its opposite? You could come up with some description that would fairly well suit you. But that is not an operational opposite. That is, it will not facilitate change because it is not alive. It is not demanding. It is simply a variation of the original, is what I mean by it being too close to the original. Whereas ordinary dualistic consciousness, intelligence would tell you that the opposite of something would be as far away as it could get. It's just right behind it. It's just right past it. It is right next door. You cannot facilitate any meaningful change operating on the basis of trying to pick out that which ordinary intelligence would declare to be the opposite. That's not it. Part of why you people drew blanks, I could have picked out something else. You recall, rather than hate the person or the group of people, I said, new information would be, if you could do it yourself, it'd be better doing it yourself than trying to take it from me or someone else, that you came up with a new piece of information, which would be a new chemical reaction within inside that kind of loop going on, wherein this feeling of hatred, which requires you talk about it, that's why I say the loop, because it's not just a feeling of hatred, you've got to be able to talk about it, to yourself at the very least. New information would create a new chemical reaction inside that loop. It would at that moment have a real effect. It would be an alteration of your own nervous system. If it was prolonged, if the effect itself were prolonged, however you managed to maintain it, you would then have a true alteration in your nervous system. You would not be the same person, no matter to what small degree. It would be the first time in your life that you had actually done anything differently. And I pointed out, the example I used at that time was, rather than hate the people, decide to try and help them. I could have picked out something else. Try and imitate them. But to try and love them will get you nowhere. That is never an operational. That is, it will not function. It is not alive. It will not facilitate any change to figure out the opposite, no matter what it is. Whatever can be merely said to be the opposite of the thing, the experience, the feeling, the attitude, whatever you classify it to be, the verbal opposite is not functional. That is why there seems to be such limited success with all of these attempts for people to do better, because it is always on the basis, I just used it as what I consider to be an archetypical example of love your enemy. Love those who hate you, which is another way of saying love those that you hate, because if somebody hates you, you hate them, or else you fear them. Same thing. Religions just clean it up, as life cleans it up, so that when you hear it, it sounds as though it has more of a valid currency to it to say love those who hate you. That lets you off the hook. It doesn't, at least right there in that one sentence, it doesn't say love those that you hate. It says love those that hate you. Because then, since you can't do it, at least you can go away and feel like, well, I'm even more so, I'm a little more enriched martyr than I was. I'm being a little more misused than I was, because not only do people hate me, I tried to love them. And they still hated me. So it's even another chorus of poor old me. So it doesn't even start off with the right kind of primary premise to say love those that you hate, because you already hate them. You would have to find something new for it to be operational. It could not be too close to being the opposite. See if you can find some more connections from the last few blanks. Days, hours, months. Having to do with talking being a part of the enriching process at the ordinary level. There are all sorts of areas of the human language that gets berated. Bureaucratic babble is a prime suspect stylish talk. I even periodically ignore the I. Jokes are made here periodically when I'll say, as they would say in California, and then I'll say something that they probably would say in California or they did last week. If I'm saying it here, it's already unhip. But it is continually, from some quarters, some parts of life's body, bureaucratic ease, hip talk is given a very bad rap. How's that for semi-hip talk? And it's ill-deserved, because all of that, and see if you can see this more specifically, I've been talking about for the last 2 tapings, that all such things, bureaucratic babble, calling a man who used to be a garbage collector, that his title now is sanitation engineer. Now, when that sort of thing started, the newest time around, I guess in this part of the world, this part of life's body, in the 60s, comedians were, and I'm sure low-level B-grade comedians still get some mileage out of that. Social critics do, linguistic critics. Stylish talk, referring to apartments, which 3 decades ago, people that lived in apartments were, like most people would, I guess, now look at those who live in trailer parks. Apartments were just, people who lived in apartments were suspect. If you didn't have your own home, right after the big war, when apartments started to get popular, at least outside of Manhattan, assuming they were ever popular there. But now, they're referred to as apartment homes. Social critics, comedians, parts of life's body that's in resistance, necessary resistance to some of this, gets great mileage out of laughing at this. Sometimes even getting vehemently, not laughing, but upset about it. Debasing the language, confusing one's thought processes. You can call this thing an apartment home, but the son of a bitch is still an apartment no matter what you call it. Or hey, you can call this guy, you can say, yes, my brother's a sanitation engineer. But the bastard's still a garbage collector, no matter what you call him. You missed it. These are prime examples of talking about it, enriching the experience of it. Because the talking about it, which is a form of thinking about it, is a part of the experience. Man who's a garbage collector. Maybe his father was a garbage collector. And he started off, let us say, got out of the 9th grade and went into the same profession, followed in his father's greasy footsteps. But by then, let's say that was the late 60s, the city with whom he was employed, or for whom he was employed, began to refer to that position as sanitation engineer. And so around the local bar, around some of his father's friends, he now referred to himself, or maybe his girlfriend referred to him now as a sanitation engineer. And some of the people there in the local bar said, you're doing the same thing your father did. I know what this kind of crap's going on down at City Hall. You're a garbage collector. Don't come in here, kid, and giving us this stuff that I'm a sanitation engineer. You're a damn garbage collector. Do you see? I wasn't going through that to go anywhere else. That was it. That has already enriched the experience. He's now, it may appear to be some kind of debate or discussion, but now his job of collecting garbage has been enriched, because now there are people who will argue with him, talk to him, debate with him, laugh at him, pat him on the back. Some may agree with him over the name of it. It's more enriched because talking about it, and to him thinking about it, because he can leave the bar and think, what low-class people. I'm going to work my way up. I've got to get out of this position. I've got to get out of this neighborhood. The kind of people that do not understand progress. Sure, I'm out there collecting people's garbage. I'm doing all this. This is a guy walking home after they laughed at him at the bar the first time he said, I'm not a garbage man, I'm a sanitation engineer. He's walking home now, talking to himself. I should get away from this neighborhood. I should do better. I'm not ashamed of my job, but I'm ashamed of having to stick around with people like this who have such a low level of intelligence and such a small feel for the progress of human nature that they would laugh. They don't understand how necessary it is. Boy, if I quit picking up their garbage, if it wasn't garbage collection, boy, would they be in trouble. All of this going home. Do you understand now the experience of being a garbage collector has been enriched? It is more complex because the thinking of it. How about somebody comes around to a realtor's office and they got bulletin board up, homes for sale, and this and that, and over here it says apartment homes available. And laugh. He's got this one person wired up, and they look at that and they begin to laugh at the realtor and say, what the hell is an apartment home? The person says, well, we call them apartment homes now. They're very nice. And you say, wait a minute, they're apartments, right? You pay for them by the month. And they're all in a big old box and everybody's packed in. Well, I wouldn't necessarily put that. Is it an apartment or not? Well, perhaps it's what you used to call an apartment. So it is what I used to call an apartment. Now you call an apartment home. Well, I guess you might put it that way. What do you mean I might put it that way? That's all it is, isn't it? Do you understand? It's enriched it. It's even enriched it with you. You're mad. You're arguing about it, but you've had a more enriching experience. It's more enriching for them. It's more enriching for those that are not even there. That's going to come in later and look around and think, well, we can't really afford a home, but hey, honey, what's an apartment home? It will now, very likely, have some effect on this person that's been arguing with you an hour earlier or the day before about the whole thing. They may now even be more melodramatic in their presentation to this potential renter of apartment homes. It may inspire them to greater flourishes. They may become more verbose in attempting to get these hapless, freckless people to move into an apartment home. This is never taken into consideration. It would especially never be taken into consideration in the manner in which I have tried to describe it to you. In those situations, which are probably at least 50% of common time, wherein the discussion of the verbalization about the experience, the renaming of it, the alteration of the description, wherein it seems to be in jeopardy, where it seems to be under assault, you might ordinarily think, well, that is not an enrichment. The people are just asking for trouble. The guy who is a garbage collector, but who now, since City Hall pointed out to him that he is now listed as a sanitation engineer, and he says that, and people laugh at him, ordinary intelligence might tell you at first, well, that is not enrichment. But that just shows you how much ordinary intelligence knows. It is an enrichment. If you, at the ordinary level, we're not talking about people involved with this now. We'll get to something else in a minute. But at the ordinary level, if it is being talked about, and it can just be you, remember. That's why I was trying to get you to see the guys walking home, bitching, carrying on the conversation still back to those people at the bar about why they don't understand that it's time to rename his profession. And it's not silly. It's not funny. That is an enrichment to him. The experience of being a sanitation engineer has now been enriched. All such discussions, even if it appears to be negative from certain views, which means nothing, but it can appear to be negative. It can appear that the person is undergoing some verbal assault for trying to use the bureaucratic babble, the hip synonym, the varied description. But that does not change the fact that at the ordinary level, it is still enriching it. It is making it more complex. The view that some ordinary intelligence might have to say, well, now that the guy started calling himself a sanitation engineer, he's going to be sorry because it's not enrichment. He's suffering from it. Whoever tells you that don't know what the hell they're talking about. Because I know who would tell you that. And if you knew anything, you'd know if they didn't know what the hell they're talking about anyway. Just because you can say, well, the person is undergoing some pressure, that they are receiving negative input for attempting to use these new terms, these new descriptions, you are wrong. Enrichment's enrichment. Complexity is complexity at the ordinary level. And the talk about an experience is a part of the experience, because talking of the experience is an aspect of thinking of the experience. And the more you think of an experience at the ordinary level, the more enriched it is, the more complex it is. The day will come, from a more revolutionary view, of course, you can rightly perceive this as being moot. But the day will come when, being a sanitation engineer, and the person thinking about it, not only saying it, but just saying it to himself and thinking about it, will now be a more enriching experience, believe it or not, than it was a year ago when he was a garbage man. It's meaningless at another level, but back at the ordinary level, it is not meaningless. If it was meaningless, life would not do it. Men didn't do it. It was not some dumbass bureaucrat somewhere decided, hey, just so we can confuse people and come up with additional jargon, at least the attorneys and doctors get too far ahead of us, let's show them, let's start changing the names of stuff. Call elevator operators, back when they were going, what was it, vertical pallets, or indoor vertical people movers. There was not somebody somewhere that sat down and decided to do that. Life decided to do that. And it could have been short-lived. It could have been that kind of cul-de-sac that life tries once and dispenses with, but it was not. There's been books written that just made fun of this, but you can get a collection of the job descriptions from the federal government and to look at some of the names. It is very widespread. A lot of the jobs you can look at now, the descriptions, and you don't know what they are. And all they are is a new description for a secretary, a janitor. It is not silly. It is not useless. And you would make a mistake to overlook it, because you do it to yourself. If you don't, why do we have, remember, since there's a collection of anonyms, I assume some of you are sharp enough, if you've never seen one, I bet you already suspect they have collections of synonyms. And if you've never even looked at one, you use them. Every time you say I, you're using a synonym. You're using a nom de plume. Unstead of saying I, the garbage collector, you're saying I, the sanitation engineer. Sometimes I, the super sanitation engineer. And not simply I, the dilapidated flat, the cold water flat. It's I, the apartment home. A small refinement while I'm here. The talking about things being a part, and remember talking I'm using synonymously with thinking. But the thinking and talking about the experience is a part of it. It is an enriching part of it. But a little refinement you can look at as being a kind of secondary part of an experience. And furthermore, you can see it as being very often a secondary part of an already secondary activity. Which the more secondary the activity is, the more necessary it is to have this kind of additional talking and thinking about it. You don't see that? All right, how about this? Do you think most of you would agree if I said the more simple a person is, their wiring, their life, the more they're inclined to talk about it? Well, some of you that may have heard that and don't like it, I'll tell you why you don't like it. Now you know why you don't like it. Nobody likes to get caught. The more simplistic people are, from an ordinary view, that's why I threw in their life. If you looked at the life they lead, what they seem to be behavioral-wise, the more simplistic they are, the more inclined they are to talk about it. Does anybody doubt that? The more simplistic they are, the more people are inclined to define themselves verbally, to tell you who they are, where they came from. The further you get down to the simple level where there is very little of a secondary life that they have, the more they get down to the levels that some people that are more complex have always found frightening, disturbing. That is, when somebody is to the point that their life is almost so simplistic that there's very little they can identify themselves as being, they fall back upon almost without exception, nationalism, protection of their territory, tribalism. This comes out in ways that apparently, or ways that are referred to in ordinary life, as political. Normally referred to as the conservative political wing, whatever name it goes under, throughout history and in any part of life's body. The conservative is a kind of resistance to any sort of movement going on, assuming that political, that body politic, wherever it was and whenever it was viable and was still breathing. That which is referred to as a conservative is always a kind of resistance vis-a-vis that which is referred to as the more liberal, because the more liberal is going to be those who are more complex. Just in an ordinary sense now, just automatically, it's already fixed up that way. And those who are more complex at the ordinary level always find it to be, it ranges from great mistrust to almost abject fear of those who are very conservative, because the more conservative, that is the more simplistic, that is the further down of thinking about the nervous system loop as just being in one direction. The further they are centered down there, the more they are likely to holler out, "Fatherland, fatherland." They find those people with some basis from their viewpoint. They find that to be very suspect and perhaps verging on dangerous. But one reason that they must do it, one reason that the poorer people are, I assume I'm not making this too complex, I'm just trying to get you to see past the surface of it, but that which appears to be in any particular society, in the state of collections of molecules known as people put together, in that state, in that society, when you get to the most simplistic level possible, economically, educationally, socially, those are going to be the people who are the most vehemently nationalistic. They can maybe be nationalistic just about their state. Damn right I'm from Alabama. You don't like it? You find people who are just almost frighteningly patriotic. And you can even find out, this is quite common, they don't want to talk about it, but here it is, this guy on his pickup truck, he's got a flag painted on the door, he's got flags up in the windows, he's got bumper stickers, "Damn right I'm from Alabama," or "Hell yes I'm an American." And you say, are you a member of the VFW or the American Legion? Well, no. Well, you were a veteran. Well, no, I didn't make the war. You find he's never been in a war. You might even find out that he got out of the war by admitting he had flat feet, or at any rate, the guy is a super patriot, and you find he's never been in a war, but he says he would be. The only point I was going with this is try to get you to see it is based upon a level that has oftentimes nothing to do with experience. All he is doing is admitting, that nervous system is admitting, there is almost no secondary way for me to define myself. He can't, fall into a bar, and people are talking, or he goes to a cocktail party, and they're talking blah, blah, blah about education, and he says, "Well, yes, I remember when I ended up my undergraduate work at Cornell, the man finished the 7th grade. Okay, he can't say anything. He can't begin to brag about his job because they see the way he's dressed. They see what he drove up in. What are you going to do? You go back to the primary level. And if being from Alabama, well, even if flag doesn't work, then you start talking about, what a coxman he is. Assuming they got a few drinks. For you northerners, what a sex machine. Free James Brown. You just can't get terms like that when they got JV put away. If he gets a few drinks, the only thing that you can fall back on, the more simplistic you are wired up, the more simplistic any individual or any group is, they have no way to identify themselves verbally. There's no way for them to think about themselves in an adequate manner on any secondary level. They got no hobbies, or if they do have a hobby, it's not the primary level. It's got to do probably with killing. It's either killing or fucking. They are inclined, where this was in case you lost your place, because so many of you look blank, is the more simplistic you are wired up, the more simplistic you are, you and anybody, the more you are inclined to talk about yourself, to enrich the experience of being you, what little experience there is in being you. The guy I described almost gave me the blues because it sounds like, well, a joke. That the more you got to talk about yourself. Now, at least I went at that at too many odd directions, This is known. There's a knowledge of this out in ordinary life. And that is, somebody that talks about themselves a whole lot. Just ordinary people know this. Or they say they know it. Somebody that talks about themselves all the time, always bragging about what all they've done, the more they do it, the less likely people are to actually believe all these war stories. And usually with good reason. The more a guy keeps talking about how great I am and where I went to school and what I made last year and what I made the year before that and my projected income, the more somebody does that, just ordinary people, the bourgeoisie of life, they find it very suspect. The talk is a necessary kind of enrichment, though, to everyone's life. Can you see any connection? Let's drag it out a bit further. People not only badmouth that kind of bureaucratic babble, they not only will berate people who talk too much about themselves, but it is very common. In fact, I use the term in another way just to show you that I don't overlook what I'm saying verbally to you people. But it is quite common for people to refer to, in a kind of pejorative sense, the mere appearance of things. The appearance of this family or this guy, this person, the appearance that he or she puts up is so questionable, or it is so transparent. People are continually in the city, at the ordinary level, making reference to the appearance of things and doing so in a negative way. The appearances of things are a sure part of things, of the things. In the same way, the thinking about experience, the talking about experience, is a sure part of the experience. You cannot separate the two. If I could lead somebody's ordinary perception along these lines, then I could get somebody with ordinary intelligence to say, all right, then somebody's talk about their experience is simply the appearance of their experience. It's not really the experience. You've got to separate them talking about it from the experience. You can't. Well, sure you can. You can say you can. But that's part of your experience of attempting to do it, because you cannot separate it. And to find in some way that it is questionable, or that it is the derogatory term to say, well, that's the mere appearance of something. You missed it. The, quote, mere appearance, with a sneer. The mere appearance of something is a part of the something. There's no way out. I'll put it to you another way. If it's not so, why the hell are there such things as mere appearances? If it's not a part of it, why are there appearances? And don't say, well, you know, sure, everything has an appearance. It has a real appearance, a proper appearance, and it has an improper one. Because this person over here, what they said is an improper appearance. So therefore it's not really connected to it. Only mine is, only the correct appearance. A part of everything is the appearance. The fact that there are, quote, mere appearances, and that they vary from person to person, is another means by which life makes people talk about things, debate things, discuss things, argue things, and hence enrich them. Because when it gets down to areas that seem to be meaningful to the individual, to you, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what your view of it is, doesn't matter how it appears to you, then somebody nearby, if you say, hey, come over here and look at that, and they look at it, and you describe it, or you want to tell your experience, you want to talk about your thinking about it, all you got to do is grab somebody, one or two people, and somebody's going to have a view that is so different from yours that your feeling is going to be, well, you're being distracted by the mere appearance of it. That is, your view is not correct. You're seeing the appearance of it, whereas, and a distorted one at that, but I am seeing closer to the essence of it. And thus, assuming it's meaningful to you and it's meaningful to them. It doesn't matter what it is, or none of this matters. They're just churning up your accounts. Then you and the person are inclined to discuss it. Argue over it. Debate it. Either reasonably, unreasonably, it doesn't matter. But do you see things having, quote, mere appearances increases the propensity of people to enrich the thing and their experience of it by talking about it. And it can be arguing. It doesn't matter. The thing itself, in a sense, that I'm not going to try to go into, is being enriched. But definitely your view of its appearance is being enriched, because what you think of is being enriched by having to defend it, by attacking somebody else's misview of it, whereas they're seeing the mere appearance. The thing is being enriched by talk. There is further enrichment, sometimes known as hand-to-hand combat, but why should we be so crude to go into that? The verbalization, when you get up to the level of civilization wherein we exist, a more secondary level, it is enough, generally, for things to be argued over, to be discussed. If you can get a real glimpse of this, you would see that differing opinions, I'll just use everyday terminology, differing opinions are necessary. They're not nugatory. The feeling that we should all come to some kind of agreement, that not only lions and lambs, but Christians and Muslims should go lay down together, eat together. Let's all hold hands and be friends, even with the Irish or the Germans. That someday, it seems to be many people's notion that life makes the notion of paradise and heaven, will be somewhere where there are, because I guess most people's opinion of heaven nowadays is a place where you can eat anything you want to and not get fat. But past that is the idea we'll be somewhere and there'll be no differences of opinion. Again, I submit to you a sterling description of graveyards. Differing opinions are not a problem. Differences of opinion at the ordinary level are not anything amiss. Differences of opinion, as they're called, are necessary. It's churning of accounts, it's cooking of the books, it's the enriching of the experience by talking about it, by thinking about it in ways that you would have not thought about it had not there been a differing opinion. That your view of it has been enriched, perhaps even slightly changed. It amounts to nothing, but at least has been enriched because someone else has a different view of it. Somebody else sees the mere appearance, which is, of course, bureaucratic Bible for saying an incorrect appearance. But the term that many people seem to use is, well, you're just dealing with the mere appearance, and you're telling somebody else your view of it, your thinking of it is not correct. It is a differing of opinions. And of course, everyone's opinion, based upon their own voice, which is the serious voice, always takes precedent, generally speaking, over anybody else's opinion, which is based on something less than a truly serious voice. But now, although talk helps renders things more complex, it only does so automatically for those who are relatively simple. Thus, I believe that you may be faced with a question: is that going to be satisfactory to you? Because you are going to, if you stay at the ordinary level of intelligence, you are going to automatically talk about your experiences, either internally or externally. And I submit to most of you, both. You are going to talk and think about what you talk and think about, which is what I started to mention a few minutes ago, is like a secondary part of already a secondary activity rather than a primary activity. But you will be thinking and talking about what you think and talk about. But you will do this. I don't have to now raise my voice and get dramatic. All you got to do is right quick look at your own life up until now. Here we go. All right? You will do that with no effort. I wasn't going to be dramatic. No effort. Have you ever had to think about, have you ever had to make a list and post it on the icebox door that I am going to talk more about what I do? To stick reminders around the house, I need to think more about myself. Did you ever take a course in how to enrich yourself, or at least how to think more and talk more about yourself and what you think and what you talk about? Have you ever even heard of such a course? You ever thought of one? It automatically enriches, but it does so at the automatic level. It does so to those relatively simple, which includes everybody in regards to this kind of activity, because they are satisfied. Even those who say they're not satisfied, that's part of the enrichment. People say, I'm not satisfied with my life. You're wrong. No. I'm not satisfied with the way I think about things. Right. Well, that's part of the enrichment. If you didn't say that, of course this is meaningless back at the ordinary level, but if you didn't say that, then this dissatisfaction would not be near as complex and as enriching unless you said it. Then the person had to go, what? Not say, well, you're much more complex. Look around you. Is it possible that you can see other people who are probably as simple as you are, as dumb as you are, and if they want, yeah, I know a bunch of them. Do they talk about it like you do and think about it? And the person might say, well, not as far as I can tell. I never heard of them, and I don't think they do. Now I can say, well, you are more enriched by complaining about it. And if there's any chance they could get any more complex, for a second they'd go, you're right. But of course they won't. But I want you to try and see it. That even by saying, no, I'm not satisfied, just because I think a lot about myself, just because I think a lot about what I think about, that still doesn't satisfy me. That's not what I said. It's an enrichment, though. It can't be proven. But I can tell you, and you should be able to hear it verbally, that if you did not think about, if you were not dissatisfied in the way you think about the way you think, then you would not be as complex as you are, which doesn't amount to shit to start with, but comparably speaking, you wouldn't even be that complex. In other words, if you're dumb at level R17, if you're simple at that level, and then you think about it a lot, and you talk about it a lot, then you are an enriched dweller at level R17. Because if you did not talk about it, you'd just be back at the ordinary level. You wouldn't know any better. You wouldn't know that you missed out. Because you can't ever be smarter than you are. You can't ever see beyond your own eyeballs. So you wouldn't know it, but I was trying to get you to see that at the ordinary, useless level, insofar as this is concerned, the more people automatically talk about themselves, the more they babble, the more they daydream, the more they internally argue, they are enriching their own experience. As simple as it may be, or as complex as they may think it is, they are enriching it. But that is only enrichment for the simple. If it's automatic, it's necessary, but it's only enrichment to the simple. And look what it's gotten you thus far. Sometimes when it's put in manners such as that, it doesn't sound like much of an inducement, does it? Much of a sales pitch for whatever this is. We got to turn the tape over. Since I brought forth a defense for mechanical talk, let me defend that which I'm sure many people would think has taken its licks around here, and that is the past. Because the past is deserving of great, if not praise, at least consideration, concern. And for one specific reason that I was going to wander about here for a few minutes tonight, and that is the past is a sitting duck. The past is just helpless. And it sure is easy, at least for some people evidently, to kick around and badmouth the past. But Jesus hates Christ. The past is helpless. People can ordinarily misfile, reconstruct, rearrange, and just generally manhandle experience and partially spent energy into that filing cabinet of the past, and it is just helpless. That's the only word for it. Let me run through my synonyms. Helpless. That's it. Helpless. An exemplary example. All right, an exemplary breakthrough in our lifetime. This is one I heard recently. Some talk show. But I've heard it several times, so I know how widespread it is. Well, someone was describing... Huh? What?
Is there something in your pocket?
Sorry. Recording trouble. It was some children, or a child, I think it was a whole panel of children, of a parent who had committed suicide. And they discussed the matter, and they discussed the matter, and then one or more of them said that after analysis and being with so-and-so, man over here with a beard and a book, that he held up, that the people, after years and years, and after seeing the book, reading the book, no longer felt the guilt, the responsibility that they all here on the panel said that they felt when they got old enough, those that were little nippers when it happened, to find out that their mother or father had committed suicide, and they went on for years and years of untold heartbreak and feelings of guilt. It was my fault. It was my fault in some way. But thanks to analysis and his book, I no longer feel this responsibility. This is a breakthrough, I suggest to you. They say that it is not their responsibility, and thus no need to feel guilt. That the responsibility was thusly on the parent that committed suicide. The camera swung around to the audience. Many, many people, scores of people, smiled and nodded. The whole panel smiled and nodded, and the guy held up his book again. And sort of a pregnant pause, and like that, at least that one section of life's body, wherein this show was being produced, and wherein people or other humans were seeing it, it's as though collectively they all went. Let me give you a description, a chemical description. Well, a verbal chemical description. I haven't changed the subject from the poor old past. This kind of breakthrough is like a generational shift. And I say breakthrough, it's been going on as far back as humans have been thinking. But this seems to be a new area of it, of people feeling guilty about their parent's suicide and then working their way through it, working their way through the guilt, thanks to analysis in his book. This kind of generational shift is to put the blame somewhere in the past and resolve your present. Now, someone that might have extremely weird eyesight might suddenly have some notion that this has possible implications and use, even if my parents didn't commit suicide, even if you didn't have any parents. To continually take that, which is already in the past, suffer over it in some manner. It is chemically, it's a negative act. It's bad enough, in this example, that I grew up without a mother. But then when about the age of 10, I found out they weren't supposed to tell me. Some kid next door heard it third-handedly, and when they laughed and said, "Your mother committed suicide. She didn't go away and live with Jesus or Elvis. She killed herself." And then a bunch of them laughed. I suffered over that for years. Never knew why. Nobody wanted to talk about it. So I just knew in my little bitty brain, being that little nipper I was and real concerned, I was a very precocious and reflective child. And so therefore I naturally assumed that it was my fault. In the audience, everybody go, "Yeah, naturally." If you're secondarily sophisticated enough, of course it's my fault. But notice, If you can forget all that and keep running parallel to yourself now, to that old kind of old thinking, life makes people's nervous system, up in the talking part, continually take the past, which seems to be dead and gone from one view, and there are things that now are affecting you in a negative way. But this kind of breakthrough is to be able to manhandle the past in some way. To get in there and stick your hand in the file. Well, what does it mean that said at one time I did so and so? Well, here, give me some whiteout. I'll just tear that up. I'll put this in somebody else's file. That's what I'll do. Let's see, there's somebody I know. Put it over there in their file. It's to be able to reconstruct that which seemed to be stable. It seemed to have happened. I suffered over my mother's suicide for years. Don't tell me it's my imagination. Don't tell me it was the mere appearance of it. I had to go into analysis. I spent thousands of dollars on drugs. I drank for years. For that one reason. You don't know what it's like. Did your mother commit suicide? I thought not. You don't know what it is. Don't tell me. It almost ruined my life. But then, I don't know, thanks to some kind of insight, thanks to continual analysis, and I worked it out, and of course thanks to his book. And I finally realized one day, I wasn't there. Well, I was there, but I was 2 years old. I didn't make my mother commit suicide. It's ridiculous. I mean, I hate that she did it, but it suddenly struck me. I wasn't actually 2. I was about 17 months old. I realized there was nothing I could have done. There was nothing I did. In fact, I found out later I was living for the previous 2 months with my aunt out in Oklahoma. But even if I'd been there, a 17-month-old kid, I couldn't have done anything. I hate it, but whatever it wasn't my fault. God, what a relief. A sitting duck. The past can absorb every possible degree of manhandling, assault, battery, threats of assault, kicks. Forget Hamlet and his worry about the slings and arrows. This thing can take 75mm shells and just and it's still the past. It never goes away. It never changes. But by so reconstructing and mishandling, manhandling, of course I'm just saying this from an ordinary level, that is that apparently you have changed the past. The person that says, thanks to analysis in his book and me trying to work this out, what was running my life for these 22 years, I got over it. I feel like a new person. That's not enrichment. But, from one view, if you were back at the city level and you were wired up to be a social critic, you could say, Jesus, J. Christ, which is the other guy's brother. You could say, you mean it took you to the age of 30 to figure out that your mother killing herself when you were 17 months old wasn't your fault? Hey, is this guy Einstein's cousin or what? Boy, what a genius. You could say that. Plus you could say, well, it's ridiculous. How can you say that you feel better? It wasn't your fault to start with. Only an idiot would have felt guilty for 22 years that their mother killed themselves when they were less than 2 years old and you thought it was your fault. To say that there's some kind of breakthrough, give me a break. You're wrong. Plus you could say, well, nothing's changed. You haven't changed the past. Well, think about it. The past exists where? The kind of past we're talking about. It exists in the verbal part of the human nervous system. Now there is such a thing as a nonverbal past. You should be able to see that quickly enough. Most reasonable dogs, wolves, raccoons won't stick their hand, their paw in a fire more than once. So there is a kind of a kind of memory, but it's nonverbal. The only way that you have got the kind of memory we're talking about now that is singular with humans is you have got to have the verbal side of the human nervous system. It's got to be up that far. And so anytime, remember where I started, anytime you talk about it at the ordinary level, you are enriching it. The past only exists, the human past, only exists through the grace of the verbal level of the nervous system. That's it. That kind of past is simply verbal. That's the only place it exists. And so you would be making an egregious mistake to say, well, wait a minute, you can't change the past. The hell you say? It's just that most people can't seem to do what they want to. And ordinary people, they don't know the basis of that I'm describing to you tonight, but they just know, many of them, they just know that I felt so guilty all my life about my mother's suicide. And if you got a few drinks in them, and you got them right in the corner of the booth, and you talk to them just right, and you kind of rub their forehead or the back of their neck, and you went, all right, I believe that you suffer all this because I've seen you all these years, but doesn't this whole thing kind of stink? And people go, yeah, but I can't stand it! And they're telling the truth. And you almost want to tell them, and this goes on in life, among family members and friends, you almost want to tell them, well, look, reasonably, it can't hardly have been your fault that your mother killed herself because of something you did being 17 months old. And the guy goes, yeah, I know it. I mean, you're fairly reasonable most of the time. Now, you know there can't be a reason. Yeah, I know it. Well, just stop thinking about it. Don't let it drive you nuts. And he goes, I've tried. I've told myself that God knows how many times. And I can't. All of that is a very low level awareness that something about this stinks. It's almost an awareness that if I could simply change, and if I gave him another drink, and said, have another drink and talk to me, I might get him to finally say, if I could just change the way I say it starts with a T, think about it. Yeah! No. Yeah! You mean if I could just change the way I think about it, I would have changed the past. No, that's far too, it starts with an S. Simple, right. You should pay tribute to the past. If the past, now remember we're not talking about anything four-dimensionally. We're talking about the past that exists in the verbal level of the human nervous system. You should always say a word, a kind word to the past. Because if it does exist as some kind of entity, the son of a bitch is the world's greatest sitting duck. It can't move. It's got no defense. You can do anything to the poor old past that you want to. Of course, there are, from certain views, you can say the past can do anything it wants to you. But we'll go into that next decade. Plus, I assume that some of you have not forgotten that which I pointed out, and I'm sure you saw. It's not that just I pointed out, that you saw yourself many moons ago, that the cerebral level, the talking, the verbal level of the human nervous system, from various views, appears to be the last one to know. I knew that you hadn't forgotten that. Some of you just saw that as being apparently obvious as hell once you saw it. That it's the last to know. You don't see any connection between that and this generational shift. The ability to do, to mishandle, to refile, to misfile, to destroy information, make up information, and the past cannot defend itself. You don't see any connection between that. Or any connection between me even pointing out that that kind of past is happening. It's not simply something that happened 22 years ago. It's something that just happened. You mean what I just thought? Well, could be. Wait a minute. No, it's too late. Another piece of a connection. Remember the one that I brought up last time we were talking about I mentioned again, the white elephant. Those of you who are real sharp, let me take out a second. I'll never get around to finding any particular use for this, probably. But I got to point out to you, the story of the white elephant, for instance. Some of you should be able to do this on your own, or it should strike you at another level. That story, the term, a white elephant, which I assume everyone knew when I first brought it up, that something is a white elephant, something that you've got. And I pointed out that one of the versions of the epistemology of it, the origin of the term was supposedly from Southeast Asia. At one time, white elephants with some group of people were sacred, and that a king, rather than just destroy some of his enemies, came up with this brilliant idea to give one of his potential enemies, some backstabbing person in the court, to send them this sacred, singular gift from the king, which they can't refuse, and they've got to even play like, I love it, I'm so overcome, I'm so honored. But he realizes it'll ruin him, just the upkeep. I might as well kill the person, they're going to die, because they got to keep the elephant up at their own expense, at the expense of their own health, and etc. The little thing I was going to point out as a side, isn't that just from a teeny bit complex, more complex level, isn't that a beautiful little story to think, God, whether it actually happened or not, but whoever made up the story, whoever saw it happen and remembered it, the little thing, if you don't get what I'm going to say, don't worry about it, and I jump back to the main path right quick. Anyway, it's not a matter that there are kings or anybody around that figures out things like this. It just gets happen, and then later somebody sees it as a metaphorical coup de maître. They see it as a stroke of tropical genius, whereas it was no such thing when it happened. I thought some of you might. If you ever get good at that, then you can quit. One other side step, you can quit ever reading great books of the world. All you got to do is read criticism of them. And by criticism, I mean real academic criticism, not necessarily attacks. But for somebody within 2 or 3 paragraphs to point out to you the far-reaching metaphorical ramifications of Moby Dick, whereas you might have spent God knows how many hours and hours and hours reading that thing and thought it was still just a fish story. But you're delighted to find out that it's a metaphor. Back to the white elephant. Back to the main thing I was going to point out. There's a way in which to use that besides what I was talking about, and that would be in ways that some of you people have already experienced, that you have been encouraged to do, but some of you have already tasted it, but it is, in a sense, to give yourself a white elephant. To put yourself in a kind of self-imposed, or at the self-imposed edge of ruin. Ruin in a wide sense, that you feel like there's going to be some great change in habits you have, or if you're from Southern California, your lifestyle. That you put yourself almost on the line, that you give yourself a kind of present. This is a kind of non-verbal decision to do something, and it's like you have already delivered the white elephant to your backyard, and you can learn to do this without any talk. It's fairly necessary that you learn to do it with almost no talk. But that you take the white elephant and use it in such a way that you could no more refuse to continue to use what you decide to do. That is the white elephant, this thing that seems to be at first blush a great gift, extraordinary, sacred, and yet you realize, God, this could spell the end of me by having this great gift. But once you have formulated it, once you have decided to do it, and you have the white elephant that you have given you and you have taken delivery of it, that you can then no more refuse the gift. You can no more refuse what it demands of you than you could if literally it had been given to you by a king under the kind of conditions that I said the story came from. That you got it and now you can't give it away. You can't explain it away, you can't send it back, you can't whine about it. But, see, if you decide to change some habit or to do something, undertake something new, and then you talk about it, you have got that kind of potential enrichment at a simple level, wherein you can say, well, I'm going to do so-and-so. And then you think, God, what a guy I am. Who else could just decide like that to do it and start to do it? Where's a mirror? Where? Am I a piece of work or what? You do understand you are now enriching that And at the mechanical level, you can enrich it to such a point, as all of you should know, that will satisfy you. That is, you don't actually ever do it. You can later have it pointed out to you, remember it, and then feel guilty over it, and further enrich it at an automatic level, and still not be required. There's no demand that then you do it. God, what a bunch of blank looks. Let me try this one. I pulled this example on you years ago, and it got blank that night. I'll try it again. There's this guy that every time you'd see him would say, first thing he'd tell you is, God, can you believe it? I quit smoking. I feel great. And he'd reach in your pocket and get a cigarette. Or he'd ask somebody if he got a cigarette. And somebody could say, I thought you quit. And he'd say, I did. You got a match? And he'd just go. Never quit, but he never admitted that he hadn't quit. And he was always, every time, if you hadn't seen him in a few weeks, he'd say, since the last time I see you, can you tell the difference? Quit smoking. I told you I would. You gotta. He'd bum one. He never bought any more, as far as I know. My suggestion, what I was trying to get you to look toward yourself, is that you can treat what would seem to be a potentially harsh, demanding, cruel, brutish decision on your part. But once the decision is made, just as soon as you can think about it, as soon as the words form in your brain, is to be able to turn away and don't ever say it again. Because the saying of it can enrich it, but you're now back at the mechanical level. Absolutely. You are running through the same chemical processes in your nervous system that you always have. If you can treat what seemed to be some wild idea you had, if you can treat that which would seem to be some new piece of information, some new decision, and you realize simultaneously that Jesus L. Christ, that's the other one, you think, God, I wish I hadn't thought that. Because simultaneously you understand that's a demanding piece of information. That would be good. That's what I should do personally. If you then treat it like, just almost as though you're in the same position as this legendary kingdom, and that the king sent you this, that decision, that idea, and it was a white elephant, and you've got to treat it like, oh, I'm so undeserving. Oh my God, I couldn't be happier. While realizing this could be the death of me. And treat it in that manner. Who would you ever tell that, God, why did that king send me this damn elephant? If you had any sense, you'd never tell anybody. Because anybody that you told, you got to consider the possibility that there would be their potential entree to better relationships with the king, to go, do you know that one guy you finally gave a white elephant? He didn't like it. He's bad-mouthing you about it. Consider the possibility of the state being, all of this kingdom being internal to you. If you can perceive some idea, a piece of potentially new and demanding information, and treat it as though it were your own self-imposed potential ruin, it is a white elephant that you have given to yourself, what can you do? You can't talk about it. You can't send it back. And you should treat it with the same kind of extraordinary, if not respect, not respect, I was going to give you a breathing room and say fear, that you would if a king, if some external powerful force had actually given it to you. May I leave you with a suggestion that if you could do that, then you could do something. What choice would you have? Your only choice would be to continue to run the same chemical program through your own nervous system, to allow them to run, to think the same thing over and over and over and over and over. No new information. Simply stabilizing your own level through a kind of simplistic enrichment about talking about it over and over, not only talking about I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, then periodically or intermittently thinking, God, I feel guilty about that. God, I feel guilty. You continue at that simple level which for any other purpose is useless. But at that simple level, it does enrich it. It enriches the body of life itself in man. But in an attempt to do this kind of activity, what you have done is left a trap door. You've always got a way out, because all you've got to do is, well, wait a minute, I hadn't abandoned the idea. Let's talk about it. Whether you're doing it with somebody else or yourself. At least you can sit around, and that if some genie jumped out of the bush and said, boy, I'm ashamed of you. You were on the right track when you thought you should have done so-and-so. And you could say, yeah, I know it. And the genie would say, well, yeah, but you hadn't done it. Yeah, but don't be so harsh on me. You know, I don't even need that. Because if you knew my mind, you would know that I suffer, I think about that every day. And if it was a good scented genie, the genie would go, yeah, you're right. I said, why am I bothering you? Well, I'll see you later. Because all that needed to get done, all that needed to be done to enrich that, you're doing. That kind of talk, to really run parallel metaphors together, I guess, that kind of talk, if you knew how to do it, back at the ordinary level of my Southeastern Asian kingdom, that kind of talk could eventually make a white elephant disappear. Make a white elephant go on a fast. Make a white elephant learn to live off of not shrubs and bark, but oxygen. In other words, it gets you out from under the potential ruinous pressure of the white elephant, simply by talking about it. But then as we sail into the sunset, some nervous system somewhere in life's body would holler, yeah, that sounds like it might be true, but that just shows the misguided, misinformed information that comes about through the mere appearance of things. And I would have to say, well, I guess you caught us again. And to close out the week, the city would smugly smile, as the audience would do, knowingly nod, and the guy down here would hold up his book again. So that we can all rest better. And since everyone seems to enjoy it, our closing thought for the week is, hey, it's hard to breathe down here.